Welcome to the OpinioNation podcast, a conversational examination of the topics in our cultural narrative which do not make sense. All right, part two. Just before we get started, is there anything from last episode which was all the aspects of welfare that we might have missed or might need some clarification? Can you think of anything?
Being poor sucks.
Being poor sucks, that's true. Oh, here's one. Contrary to popular belief, 6% of the welfare budget goes to unemployment.
And sick.
And sick. And if it's only 1% of people who are doing something dishonest, that's 0.06% of the welfare budget. And that is less than the subsidies we give to coal mining magnates and things like that. So it's a matter of priority, really, isn't it?
Yeah,
what we're worried about.
I mean, that less than 1% doing something wrong is, that's from an official study as well. I've read that.
So only 1 in 100 unemployed people are doing anything
less
remotely.
Than 1 in 100, yeah.
Yeah. Okay.
In Australia are doing anything wrong.
But it's taking up a large part of our news cycle, and this happens regularly, that government wants to put the boot into unemployed people as if there's some great big problem.
And I mean, considering that if there's a public holiday and you have to estimate your Friday's earnings so as you can declare on Thursday instead, and you estimate wrong and don't correct it later, that puts you in that 1%.
Right. So a mistake is enough to...
Yeah.
Yeah, an honest mistake.
Yeah, it's just a simple thing. And it can only be might be like a $10 payment that you got for that fortnight. And that still puts you in that 1% of wrongdoers because you haven't adjusted it to get no money.
Yeah, and it's not exactly easy. They don't make it easy to make all the declarations honest and easily fulfilled for like a busy family man.
For sure. To adjust that, you'd actually have to go into the goddamn office, which means you're going to sit there for half a day.
Well, it takes 2 hours out of your day. Yeah.
Yeah, and if you're working... and have kids, it's pretty hard to find 2 hours just lying around.
I remember one time I actually found a way to email Centrelink. Now, they hide this deliberately so that they don't have to employ a staff member to actually read emails and respond to them. But I found a way on their website. And after it hadn't been resolved for 6 weeks, I went into the office and they said, you can do this online. And I said, well, I emailed you about it 6 weeks ago. And they've got a record of it.
Yeah.
And it turns out whatever they had decided that I had not filled in a form or some such thing, they had to begrudgingly backtrack and go, well, actually, you did contact us, and you contacted us 1 day after the circumstances changed.
Yeah.
And you had 2 weeks. Mm-hmm. So I was 13 days ahead of the curve, but they were 6 weeks behind the curve.
Yeah.
Yeah, but anyway.
I remember I was working 55-hour weeks at one point. And I had to declare to Centrelink because it was in the first 12 weeks or whatever it is to get payments for the other half, parenting payments.
Yep.
I've got to declare even if I'm working so she gets her payments and adjusted accordingly and whatnot and etc. Something had gone wrong. I needed to contact them. My only day off was the weekend. I was at work at 6 a.m. and I was not finishing until 7 p.m. I mean, there was no way I could contact them through business hours. So I sent them an email. I found the, request Centrelink callback kind of contact thing. And I expressly said that these are my hours. Could you please call me during my lunch break so as I can talk to them? Because there's no way in my lunch break that I could have sat on hold long enough to get through.
Yeah, exactly. If you got half an hour to an hour and you're trying to eat lunch,
it wasn't
going to
happen.
Yeah.
So they rang me back during work hours while I was working, not during lunch. Couldn't answer the phone. And their message was along the lines of, we've attempted to contact you, you now need to contact us.
Yeah. So these sorts of systems are deliberately designed, it seems like anyway, that they're deliberately designed to make people feel grateful for whatever pittance the government provides. And here's the thing. We shouldn't feel grateful for rights. If it's a right, there's no need to be thankful for it because the entire society has decided that this is the bare minimum that any citizen should have for their quality of life. If it takes money to fulfill your rights, whether it's food and shelter and whatever else it is, if it takes money to do that, you have a right to money. And them, the government treating it as if it's some kind of favour is actually arse backwards.
Yeah, I do for the most part agree with your point. I'd put a caveat on that. I mean, it is nice that we have that as a right.
But that implies even that it's nice, that it's in some way optional.
Well, there are countries that don't have it as a right.
And we're not those countries.
No, we aren't.
And we consider ourselves better than those countries.
This is a fundamental right of being in Australia.
Yeah.
And I would be grateful if they didn't make it so bloody hard to do.
We could extend this further and say, well, the only way to fulfill basic universal human rights is to have some money.
Yeah.
If you want shelter and you want food,
Yeah.
the only way to do that is to have money.
Yeah.
And so it's not even just civic duty or civic rights that we're talking about. It's universal human rights.
Yeah.
Yeah,
See, I suppose my point is that the fact that I live in a country that has social welfare would make me grateful and very, very pleased. Okay, so I would be, thankful that it existed. However, the fact that it's sort of like lorded over Centrelink recipients like a big stick, and begrudgingly given and not seen as something that we just deserve because we can't find work. And given that there's an unemployment rate of, 6% officially or whatever.
Yeah, which makes it as much as 20% of underemployment.
Yeah,
included.
I mean, there aren't a lot of options. If you can't find work, especially if you live in regional Australia and you can't find work and there's none going around and you're doing your best, they should not make you feel so
it's
set
not
upon.
Necessarily
like so
a personal failing.
No.
It doesn't mean you're a bad person. Now, when we talk about civilization, for example, and we think that, well, the reason we pay people is because they've got rights, and that's part of our constitution, that people have rights, making them feel shit about claiming those rights is a really nasty thing to do, especially considering that the priorities of government expenditure are towards big business subsidies in the first place.
Yep.
It's just completely ass backwards. But anyway, we need to move on from this.
We do.
That was a recap of our last episode, which was about welfare. So I guess maybe it'll become a tradition when I say, what's on your mind this week?
Yeah. Although this kind of does bring us to basic income.
Oh, yeah, there's something from last episode that we didn't really discuss, was the idea, a couple of ideas. One is the nature of wage labour and the means of production, if you want to get socialist about it. But another idea that's been coming up in multiple countries is the idea of a universal basic income, which means, just a brief explanation, that every citizen in a country gets a bare minimum. Say in Australia, it might be something like $20,000 a year, which is what? That's somewhere between a pension and unemployment, isn't it?
Unemployment's about $15,000 a year.
Right. So approximately. So in the ballpark, right? And the idea with that is it's tax-free. You don't need a bureaucracy, so you save money because everyone gets it. You don't need to check if someone deserves it or not. So you save a bunch of bureaucratic money there. And the idea is that no matter who you are or what you do, there is a certain amount of money that is available to fulfill your basic rights.
Yep.
Now, the reason that you pay rich people this at the same time as paying poor people this is just so you don't have to create a completely needless industry which makes people feel crap about themselves.
We just, as a society, accept that everybody is entitled to the bare minimum.
And the main argument against this idea is, how do you pay for it? Now, here's another thing from first episode we didn't really discuss. We're going to have to do a whole episode about it, I think. It's the nature of central banking in the globalized system. We're going to have to deal with that separately. But the idea is that you use tax approximately to pay everybody's basic income.
Yep.
So some people might think, oh, that means a tax raise. Well, actually, not necessarily.
No.
It just depends on two things: who it comes from and what money you save from, say, dissolving Centrelink.
Well, one of the most profitable times, just sort of this semi-aside, but sort of to the point, one of the most profitable, that's probably not the right word, post-World War II, America.
Oh, yes, yes.
Their tax rate was something like What was it for big business?
I think in some places it was 92%.
92%. I was
Now,
about to say that, but I
even
thought
if
it
we
was
be
ridiculous.
conservative and take it back to 75 or 80%, just post World War II, big business was paying 3/4 of their income in tax.
Yeah.
And that was the most prosperous.
Prosperous, that's the word I was looking for.
It was the time where the most growth happened in the shortest amount of time in the US.
Yep. And big businesses did not fold, collapse, and otherwise implode.
No, not at all.
You know, the country actually rebuilt itself.
Well, there's two ways to look at the way money flows, like we discussed last episode, where if a bunch of rich people pay no tax, the idea is that they have more money to spend through the economy, and that is trickle-down economics.
Yeah.
But the other way to look at it is if a bunch of relatively impoverished people have more money, they spend it and the money trickles up, and the rich people end up taking the share anyway.
Yep.
It's just that the liquidity that flows upwards through the economy is proven.
Yeah.
The
Whereas
liquidity that flows downwards is not proven.
if you're a multi-millionaire, you're already spending as much money as you can spend. More money is just going to sit in the bank.
There's an example. A rich person might buy a very expensive car, but they don't need 1,000 cars.
No.
Which would be the equivalent of their income compared to someone else who buys a car.
They've already fixed their car. They've already bought their washing machine. They've already bought their house.
Yep. And so
all
what
paid for.
happens is a lot of that money is a dead end.
Yeah.
It either goes offshore untaxed in various evasion techniques, or it ends up in the fire sector. And the fire sector is finance, insurance, and real estate. And there's an amazing economist who I follow pretty regularly. His name is Michael Hudson, who has come to the conclusion that the fire sector, which is most of Wall Street, is actually an overhead. It's not a productive part of the economy. It's actually an expense because productive money goes directly to Wall Street and it's a big casino, but it doesn't actually build anything real. It just shuffles money from A to B, from column A to column B, and in the end, it resembles a wealth extraction mechanism from a society rather than being genuinely productive.
This brings us to the distinction between productive wealth and unproductive wealth.
Yes, exactly. Now, in neoclassical economics, as I understand it, there's no such thing as unproductive wealth. And
however,
look,
a tradie, a builder, who has managed to earn $1 million, and started out as an apprentice building houses. By the time he's a millionaire, he's trained umpteen number of apprentices. He's got that many other building constructions. He's built houses. He's created something of value to society, plus work.
Yep, there's been a lot of houses built and a lot of people employed.
Something tangible exists for the money he has earned.
Yep.
An investment banker,
a hedge fund manager or something.
Has fiddled some numbers and guessed right a few times, and he's now wealthy. There is no tangible result for his accumulation of wealth.
And then when we complicate matters, when that gambling culture of Wall Street and financiers, I guess we could call them, goes too far, we get what happened in 2008 where they essentially proved the system of incentives and self-correction was complete bollocks, collapsed the whole thing. And guess what happened? Quantitative easing happened. And that means the government prints, quote unquote, billions and billions of dollars to simply hand to the banks and financiers so that they can continue doing what they're doing. Because we're so dependent on this system that it's incomprehensible for the average politician to consider that there needs to be systemic transformation.
Although I love what Iceland did at the same time.
Yeah. Well, they arrested a bunch of bankers.
Yeah. They said, no, you're a private corporation. We taxpayers are not bailing you out. You fucked your business.
Well, they did actually have to have something that resembles a revolution to do that.
They did.
And let's not...
And they ended up at the top of US's terrorist list for doing it.
Well, a lot of powerful people got shafted out of the money that they think they are owed, despite the fact it's entirely made up in the first place.
But isn't it the system of capitalism where if a business can't support itself, it folds? I mean,
absolutely,
that's what capitalism is.
Yes.
So the second we bail out of business, we're no longer operating under capitalism.
No, that's socialism for the rich.
It is.
That's everybody. When you print billions and billions of dollars, and I think from 2008, it was something like 11 trillion globally, because each Western nation did exactly the same thing, essentially, apart from Iceland. But that means that all that extra money in circulation devalues all the other money in circulation, which essentially means that the majority of people pay the rich to stay rich.
Yeah.
Yeah. Now, Iceland's slightly different, where the people revolted. Oh my God, the peasants are revolting, right? Of course they're revolting. Anyway, the rose-coloured glasses would say that Iceland had a peaceful revolution, but that would have to ignore the riots.
Yeah. No, peaceful revolution's easily ignored.
Yeah. Well, it's not a revolution if it's peaceful.
Yeah.
My opinion,
people got
that's
very
another
serious.
Discussion.
People got very serious about it.
So the end result was Iceland arrested the bankers, extradited them from wherever they were hiding, put them in jail, charged them, rewrote their constitution so that it was now illegal to do exactly what the bankers did everywhere.
Those bankers were literally guilty of fraud.
Oh, absolutely.
Yeah.
Fraud, exploitation, criminal activity. That's why the term banksters comes around, like gangster.
And the thing is, it's socially accepted. We all know that the extremely wealthy bankers and stuff.
Normalised.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And we just sort of shrug and say, well, what can we do about it? Well, Iceland showed us. Get fucking angry. Oh, I'm swearing again. Sorry.
We're allowed to swear. Let's do it. Fuck.
Get angry. Get bloody angry. And say enough's enough.
Maybe there's something different about the Icelandic people to other Western cultures, because they are essentially a Western culture. But the thing is, maybe there's some pragmatic element to the cultural psyche in Iceland which says, oh, I see what you're doing there. No, we're not having that.
Well, they're one of the most educated societies.
Well, keep in mind, this is a country with only a few 100,000 people.
Yep.
So a smaller group might actually...
I suppose the
be
influence.
more conducive culturally to massive change.
Yeah.
Because when we have a larger and larger group with hundreds of millions of people...
I suppose that's right, isn't it? Iceland. What's the population of Iceland?
I think it's only 200,000 or 300,000.
Yeah, so it's like smaller than Geelong.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I mean, you can get most of Geelong to agree to something.
And they're almost self-sufficient because they've got so much geothermal energy and so much fishing. I think that's the main two things, is the aluminium industry, which is basically powered by free electricity.
Yeah.
And the fishing industry, which is most of the diet, then they don't actually need imperialism in the same way other countries do.
They can look after themselves and do what they want.
And so maybe they were better placed to be able to resist the banking cartels.
Yeah. Although we've got fertile land pretty much everywhere. I was talking to someone recently about this, how back in the day, historically speaking, lands were often commons. I mean, a village the land was usable by all the village. They would grow their own food. They would actually be self-sufficient in a community. It was often, historically, only when a lord declared the common lands to be his personal hunting ground or whatever it was that people would then end up starving. They'd be forced to move to cities and they wouldn't be able to actually look after themselves.
Yeah, there's something that we forget is that little villages were often self-sufficient and they were cruising along just fine before some, self-proclaimed king rocked up claiming religion and some watery tart in a lake threw a scimitar at him or whatever it was to reference Monty Python.
Yep.
I think things were cruising along quite well before all that happened.
Yeah, we as a species we used to have the capacity to completely look after ourselves in small groups.
So somehow the centralization of hierarchy might have been, at best, a double-edged sword. I mean, there's benefits to centralization, but there's also some almost invisible penalties that we see around us.
Well, when I look at Australia and communities within Australia, I'm brought to mind of Black Saturday.
Black Saturday, the bushfires?
Yeah, the massive bushfires. I know people from everywhere that volunteered to flock north to help out. make bloody sandwiches or whatever it was.
Yep.
You know, nationally mobilized, even though they were individuals.
None of them were ordered to do it.
There was
all
no
just
central command.
demonstrated their own empathy for their fellow human beings and went off to help
into
out.
it.
Yep.
I mean, sure, the fire brigade was sent there because the fire brigade was coordinated and whatnot and etc.
Yep.
But individuals volunteered and took the time to travel north. Or my partner, for instance, shaved her head and raised $2,000 at a pub one night, you know.
Excellent.
Just everywhere in this country, bit by bit, individually self-motivated, threw their hat into the ring to help out.
Now, it didn't require a state order. The government didn't say everybody has to mobilise to fix this problem. People
We
did
saw
it
a
on their own.
problem and we all thought, geez, that needs a bit of help.
Now, that's awesome, and that's a demonstration of the human spirit that, in my opinion, is actually contradictory to the economic rules that we live by. Because
most people don't actually function like they believe. Okay, so
it just proves to me that the way a society operates under the present model of really existing capitalism, whatever variation you want to call it, the rules there that self-interest is paramount are completely wrong.
They are wrong. The average individual, no matter how right-wing they might think they are, still values community.
Well, you can still help your neighbour.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Unless they're a sociopath, they are actually not capitalist.
Now, when we're making laws for this sort of thing, that it's... I don't know exactly what I'm trying to say, but if it turns out that some people who lack that sort of empathy and community spirit end up in positions of power, how do we think that that will affect our laws? So if there is a bunch of people who lack that deep understanding and that deep human feeling of empathy for their fellow man, just hypothetically, if it is the case that they are lawmakers, how would that change the nature of the laws we live by?
Well, I'm sure you've heard this quote. Anybody that's gone through litigation has heard probably some lawyer say it's about the law, not justice.
Yes.
Now, the second that the legal system and law stop being justice, we should have chopped someone's head off.
Well, maybe, but I think you're referring to the difference between common law and...
No, but the whole point of law is to seek justice.
Right.
If law and justice aren't the same thing, then the law is broken.
And it's unjust.
Exactly, which makes it invalid, because if the law is not just, then its entire function is void.
So let's follow this through for a sec. If the law is unjust and a bunch of people declare that this law is unjust and they start ignoring it, what happens next? Well, in my opinion, a bunch of men with guns and uniforms turn up and sort you out. Because, like, for example, a police officer is much like that legal scenario you mentioned earlier where the law is the law, and the police officer is allowed to, and encouraged actually, to disregard their own personal feelings about justice because their job is to enforce the law.
Yeah. However, I know of a circumstance...
There's a difference in practicality.
Yeah, there is.
Yeah.
I know of a circumstance where a bunch of young kids, high school, were doing a whole bunch of inappropriate things, graffitis and throwing bins off cliffs.
Little bits of rebellion here and there.
All sorts of shenanigans. And they happened to film the entire escapades over, I don't know, months.
Which doesn't seem particularly bright.
No, it wasn't bright. Eventually, of course, as you kind of expect, the footage was found.
Right.
And many parents were dragged into the principal's office to sit through hours and hours of their children being, well, disreputable. The arresting officer, local policeman, instead of pressing the actual charges, and putting them through the system that would have resulted in a whole bunch of convictions for minors that were just acting out, he took it upon himself to just request that he forced them to clean up the graffiti they'd done, do a bit of community service in a very casual way.
Oh, instead of putting it through the liturgical system.
Yeah, there was no legal system. He just got them to clean up after themselves. as a punishment.
So it was like an unofficial way of saying, look,
We got
I can
you.
completely screw your life up, or I can say, if you voluntarily go through with this action, and this,
Yeah.
what's the word?
one of the-
Recompense or something like that.
Yeah. I mean, one of the bins that was thrown over a cliff was actually this police officer's. But he was, local town copper, local town children. He took it upon himself to just make them do the thing without giving them a record.
But you're telling me that police officer acted illegally?
Basically, yeah.
Yeah. So in the real politic of this sort of set of laws, there's the wiggle room itself is not supposed to exist. And if it didn't exist, maybe we'd all be a lot more pissed off.
Well, I suppose actually he probably didn't act illegally because by doing what he did, no one pressed charges, as it were.
So it's only when charges are pressed that the law comes into play.
Kind of, yeah.
But illegal
I'm not a
activity
lawyer,
did occur, and the policeman's job is to enforce the law.
Yeah, he got them. He got their parents involved. I mean, these were all minors.
You're talking about justice, not the law.
Exactly.
Now, that's why I said he acted illegally.
Yeah.
Now, there's a downside to this where the more police officers start to take it upon themselves to allow a little bit of wiggle room here and there in the law, that can escalate in a pretty bad way and end up being much the same as gangsters.
Yeah.
Really.
I mean, for every good story you hear about police, you hear half a dozen bad.
Yeah. Hey, thanks for listening. We hope our discussion was useful in providing additional perspectives about the topics of today. We hope you join us again next time. Bye-bye. Peace.